Alright everyone, so firstly, I know it is not 2022. I know I'm quite late to this party, but I've seen a lot of people making videos like this, kind of reviewing their year. And this is the first time that I've really taken some time over the last couple of weeks to review my year and look at, the lessons that I learned, the mistakes that I made. And I genuinely have found it to be one of the most therapeutic and beautiful exercises I've done in a very long time. So I'd highly encourage you to do the same. Just look back at your year and think about, what could I have done better? And what lessons did I learn? So with further ado, I'm going to try and commit to doing this at least once a year. And these are the lessons that I learned in 2022. Okay, so the first lesson that I learned this year is kind of a weird one. It's going to take me a while to explain, but it's the concept of a motivational vacuum. So what does that mean? First of all, I think it's a very, very important question to genuinely sit and ask yourself, why do you do what you do, right? And this lesson really came about because for the first time this year, someone who I really looked up to, who was a mentor of sorts, asked me, Courtne, why did you start a business in the first place? Like, I started a business when I was 15, then left school at 17, moved all the way around the world and, lived in a bunch of countries since then. That's not normal. There has to be some reason that you would put that pressure on yourself. So why did you go the path less followed by, and why did you actually start a business? And I think for the last couple of years, I genuinely think I've just been doing one foot ahead of the next and just taking everything step by step. I've never really stopped to really think, why did I do this in the first place? And what you come to realize as you go through this journey is humans only ever do anything out of one of two reasons, right? People either do things out of desperation or aspiration. So desperation is, you're born in absolute poverty and, you need to get a business to work, or you need to do something because you want money for food, right? That's desperation. Aspiration is you aspire to get that Ferrari or move to Dubai or do something like that. And I think if I really sit down and reflect, why did I start my first business? Why did I do what I've done? I genuinely think it's come from an intrinsic need of desperation. Because when I was growing up, I hated the area that I was born in. I was born in a small town in South Africa, Boksburg, and I, for whatever reason, always found myself in online world where I was surrounded by people who grew up in cities like London and LA, and I just never had a lot of the opportunities that a lot of these kids had, right? And again, yeah, I get it. This might be first world problems, but even small things like when I first started, my first business, I was trying to do drop shipping and there's no Amazon in South Africa. And so getting parcels shipped to your house and there's no postal service and, the Wi-Fi was shit. And there was just like a lot of problems that just happened over time. And all I wanted to do was leave. And I knew that, my parents weren't going to be able to get me to leave. And I also knew that, school wasn't the way, because even if I made it all the way through the school system and became a doctor, which, for most people, if they do well at school, which is, the path that I would have chosen, I still wouldn't have been able to make enough money to live in these cities like London and Dubai. So I just realized that really, really on. And so I thought, well, if no one else is going to do it for me, then I'm going to do it myself. And that led me to start my first business, try and make some money, and ultimately just get out. And this is where the motivational vacuum comes in, because I did it, right? I left South Africa, I moved to Australia, I then lived in London, I lived in all these places and came back, and then I moved to Cape Town, specifically Camps Bay. Now, if you know anything about South Africa, Camps Bay is probably like the most sought out area in the whole country, at least for, 21, 22-year-olds, like anywhere in that age bracket, right? So I had achieved my initial motivation for starting a business. And that's where this whole motivational vacuum comes in, because once you've achieved what initially gave you that spur of motivation, you kind of left in this empty void where, unless you course correct and consciously realize, okay, I've fulfilled that basic need, now I need to set my next motivation, whether it's desperation or aspiration, doesn't matter, but you either have to raise your standards and therefore go into a mode of desperation, or expose yourself to more abundance and aspire for more. You have to do one or the other. Otherwise, you end up just in this area of comfort, right? And this is a big lesson that I learned, but growth and comfort can't exist at the same time because they are polar opposites of each other. And I think a lot of people fulfill their basic needs of initial motivation in whatever it is in life, and then they enter this dead zone where they're not motivated to achieve the next thing, and they're consistently in this vacuum where nothing's propelling them forward. And what you end up doing is just doing the absolute bare minimum to just maintain your standard that you don't move forward. And then you wake up, at the age of 40 and you realize, how did I get here? And that's where that motivational vacuum comes in, is if you don't set new goals and consciously realize I've fulfilled my original purpose here or my original motivation, you just end up in this zone where you're not moving forward and you're just stagnating. And again, I just want to summarize this because I have some notes in front of me. When I talk about this concept of growth and comfort cannot exist at the same time. I think a perfect parallel to explain that is if you look at a Toyota and a Ferrari, right? Because they're polar opposites. A Ferrari looks fantastic, right? It drives really, really fast and it's a car that everyone wants. But the problem is they are very, very unreliable. They break very often, and when they do break, it's very expensive, complicated, and time-consuming to fix. Then you get a Toyota, which almost never breaks, and it's very reliable. It's very cheap, very simple, and very quick to fix. But it's not really anything that people aspire for, right? It's just a standard car. And that really shows you how you can't have both at the same time. You have to trade off. Again, growth and comfort just cannot exist at the same time. And if you are not consciously aware, you'll enter this zone where you're consistently stuck in comfort because you haven't set your eyes on the next thing to propel you forward. Okay, so another lesson that I learned this year is actually a two-part lesson, right? The first one is that business intrinsically is a sport. And the second thing is that money genuinely is just a deal with the devil. And I think a good way to summarize this is a good mentor of mine said, if you look at anyone who's succeeded in anything, doesn't even have to be business, could be any sport, it is simply the level of sacrifice they've gone through that is usually directly proportional to the amount of success that they've had. And if you look at some of the most successful people, they've usually gone through the most tremendous amount of things in their childhood, and the amount of sacrifice that they've had to endure to get to where they get, for most people, they just can't believe that, right? And business is hard. I genuinely think that most people don't understand the amount of sacrifice you have to go through to get to certain levels of the game. And that's where the deal with the devil comes in, right? Which is depending on how much money you want in life. And again, money is just the scorecard that you use in business. But depending on how much money you want, the worse deal you get, right? And you have to be willing to look at that and accept it and say, okay, this is what I want. And I have to have all these trades off, and then consciously admit that that's what you want. Take it on the chin, and then also go into it with the expectation. Because I think if a lot of people knew this level of sacrifice they have to go through, they wouldn't even try in the first place, and they would just avoid a lot of problems that people run into. And I think a true part of the problem for this is social media as in general. Because if you look at social media, it's just someone's highlight reel. No one posts the sacrifices or the pain that they've gone through. They only post the best parts about their life. And no one really then understands the sacrifices or the trade-offs that they've gone through. And I think a lot about this with myself in some respects as well. And this really came up for me recently, and I'll give you a story to explain this, but I recently went to the Apple store here in Dubai, and I went there to go and have a look at an Apple Studio display, right? Because I'm setting up a new office. But I saw a little kid there, and he was playing on the new iPhone, and it has this little dynamic island. And I looked at it, and I thought that was kind of cool. And I was watching him play with it for a bit, and I ended up buying the latest iPhone. And I didn't look at the price. I don't know how much it was. I just bought it. There was zero hesitation. And as I was walking out the store, I was thinking to myself, wow, I just bought the best phone without looking at the price or really even thinking too much about it. I just did it. And I'm incredibly fortunate and grateful to be in that position. This was the first time I consciously took note of it. But what I also thought about is I'm in this position, but I also never had a high school farewell, right? You have those big fancy farewells at the end of your school career. I never had that. And I look at a lot of my friends and things that I grew up with who went to university, and they had all the drinking parties and all the games and all those memories, which as they grow older in life, they start to reflect back on. I never had that. But in exchange, I've had opportunities, and I continue to have opportunities that a lot of them have never, won't ever have access to, because we chose very, very simple paths, or very different paths rather. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that is the choice that I made, and that's the deal that I got, and the trade-offs that I had to take place. And I fully admit that that's a decision that I made, and I'm very comfortable with it, and I accept the consequences of it. But I think people need to genuinely think a lot more about the decisions that they make. And I'm not trying to put you off starting a business at all, right? I think starting a business is one of the most amazing and self-discovering exercises you can do. But I do think it's important to go into it with your eyes open, that if you want to reach this massive level of success which you see portrayed online, there is a huge amount of sacrifice and a big climb that you have to go through to get there. Okay, so that's the money part. Now let's talk about the sport part, because this is also something that hit hard for me this year. If you look at a lot of people who play at the top 1% of whatever sport they choose in life, right? Think football, cricket, any of these people. They literally spend the entire week eating at the best possible diet they can, looking after themselves so that they can perform for a 90-minute soccer game or maybe a quick little tennis match here and there. And they spend their entire week, their entire life preparing for these short 90-minute gaps which make or break their career. And I think business is the best sport in the world, simply because it's one of the sports that you can play for your whole life, where a lot of these other sports are very, very short-lived. And it's also the only sport that really can set in motion a foundation for the future of your family and your children's children if you do it right. But having said that, there's a lot of people who don't treat it like a sport. They start a business and they're eating junk food, their diet's all over the show. They're not primed or ready to perform at their best of their best. And I think if you start looking at business as a sport, you start changing your attitude and the way that you look at a lot of things. And for me, this year at least really hit home, because I've kind of reached a phase now where I look at business entirely as a sport. And I'm trying to be the absolute best at the game that I play, right? For me, money has just become a side effect of playing the game. Now it's more about how can I build the best business possible that I'm genuinely very, very proud of and that I want to represent, and how can I become the best at my craft. And for any of you watching this, if you run a business or you've started or you're thinking of starting one or anything like that, I genuinely wish that you get to this phase as quickly as possible, where you start looking at your work not as a way to make money, but a way to just excel at the sport or the craft you've chosen to do. Because when you do so, everything changes. You start taking small attention and putting it on the smallest of things, because you want everything to be perfect. And I genuinely think that that's how, the best business icons look at their businesses, is they look at it as a way not of making money, but a way of self-expression, a way of how can I become the best at what I want to do. And if I look at the biggest winners in the game, or at least the most successful people I know, they all embody that. They have absolute dedication and just true concentration on just becoming the best in the world at their specific niche. And that's all they care about, right? Money and everything else is just a side effect. And I think that's an incredibly, incredibly important lesson. Okay, so the third lesson that I learned this year is really the power of education. And we hear everyone talk about this online. I have always been really, really fascinated, because you see a lot of influencers and business people online, and almost all of them have made a lot of money in some business vehicle somehow. But for some reason, they all have a passion for education. And it's always confused me, this whole phrase of reform the education system. I've heard that being said by so many different people online. I've always been really confused. Why are all these business people so obsessed or so passionate about education in general? And I think it was really this year, because this year I invested well over $200,000 into courses, coaches, mentorships, just programs, even just taking successful people out for dinner, just so that I can pick their brain and, try and gather some knowledge. I truly started to value what education means this year, and it's completely changed my worldview and the way that I look at things. And now I can finally see why all these people have such a strong burning passion for education. They say that education is power and education is key, and I genuinely believe that. And it frustrates me now more than ever, because I often think about this myself, and I look at my childhood, because I was one of the people that did really, really well in school, right? And that's unusual to see, at least in this whole online world. And I think about how much time I spent learning and studying all these things that have meant absolutely nothing in life to me, right? I think about if I'd spent all that time that I spent when I was younger learning Pythagoras and all these things, if I deployed that energy into learning other stuff that, today I've had to invest a lot of time into, how much further I would be, right? A simple thing is, this year I had to spend a lot of time, well, not this year, 2022, I had to spend a lot of time learning about taxes and how the tax system works and the different treaties that countries have and all these things. And I sit here and I can't think of anyone in the modern world who wouldn't benefit from understanding a little bit about how taxes work, how to optimize your tax structure, all these things, yet it's not taught in school. It really does confuse me. And if anything, I think me doing well in school has held me back way more than it has ever helped me, because there's so much conditioning that I had to undo to kind of have the beliefs that I now hold today. And as I said, if I had learned what I know now back then, I think I'd be way further ahead. And I finally get it why all these people are so passionate about education, because if there's one piece of advice I can give you, or one thing that I learned, is just as soon as you can, invest in yourself to close that learning gap. It's the only thing that matters. And again, I think about having these lessons now, the knowledge that I have now, if I would send my children to school one day. And in the current form of education system, I genuinely don't think so. And that's a weird thing to say. And obviously I'm still on this journey learning, but it's really, really strange to see that, unfortunately, most parents have to spend their entire lives, going and working, that they don't have the time to educate their children. And it's incredible that today we have YouTube and you guys can watch videos like this. But for most people, this isn't a reality, and they're just going through a system, getting taught things which is utterly useless and has no impact whatsoever. And it's crazy, but I get it now. I get it. And if anything, I'm now also one of those influencers, or not even influencer, but I also just for some reason now have a passion about education, because I can see it as the unlocker for exponential growth that, I wish that I had. And I wish I had videos like this way earlier on. Okay, so speaking of education and being taught things, that brings me to lesson number 4, which is to simply guard your inputs. So to me, an input is anything that you consume that's knowledge-based, right? So every TikTok, every Instagram reel, YouTube video, every lecture you watch or get taught, anything like that, every book you read, those are all inputs. And I often think if you compare a human to a car, if you put garbage in, like if you put terrible fuel into a car, the car's not going to move forward very fast, right? And it's the exact same thing with a human, right? If you put garbage inputs in, if you put terrible food into your body, the energy that you exert is going to be terrible. And I often think if you show me someone's inputs, I can genuinely show you their future. And I think that's the truest form that I learned this year. And most people don't guard their inputs at all. And I was guilty of this myself, but most people go through their day and they scroll through social media. They pretty much handed over the control of the knowledge that they consume to some algorithm, which is usually not got their best interests at heart, or they turn on the news, which has been designed by marketers who know exactly which buttons to press to get them to do certain things. And that's just it. Most people are going through life letting other things, external factors, control the knowledge that they consume. And once you understood that the knowledge you consume ultimately plays the biggest role in the outputs you get in life, it really surprised me that people don't consciously take the time to question every thought that they have. If you have a thought, someone put it there. That's what you need to also remember is when you were a baby, you were born and you had absolutely no beliefs, right? You didn't believe that, the sun was red or that sun was blue. You didn't believe that, people could be racist or couldn't be racist, that, gravity was up or down. You didn't believe anything. Every thought you have, someone has put into your head. And I think it's an incredibly self-aware moment when you can look at yourself and say, every thought or belief that I have, who put it there? And should I question why they put it there or not? And just to summarize this into like a very actionable step you can take is if you just go look at your YouTube subscription inbox, because I think if you look at someone's YouTube subscriptions, you can get a very accurate picture of what they consume and kind of what direction in life they're going through. And I think the most basic exercise everyone should do is unsubscribe from everyone except for just 5 people. Right? And those 5 people can be in very different areas of life. So you could watch one person who's, teaching you about fitness. You could watch another person who's teaching you about business and someone else who's teaching you about philosophy. It doesn't really matter. But just by concentrating your inputs into 5 people, you unlock a huge amount of power within yourself because you can filter out knowledge. You need to choose 5 people who you have fact checked, who actually know what they're talking about. They know what they mean, they say what they believe, and you genuinely want to learn from them, and then say no to all the noise around them. And I genuinely think if you just hone in on 5 people, and it could be anyone, right? It doesn't have to be me. I'm not saying, listen to me, and that's not the point of this. I'm just saying if you say no to more people and no to more random spirals you can get taken down on the internet, just concentrate on 5 core, not missions, but 5 core lessons or principles that people are passing over to you, you'll get a lot further just by narrowing down your inputs and at least just questioning who are your 5 people and what are the 5 commonalities between those people that make you almost magnetic to them. All right, so I think this is going to be a little bit of an interesting one, but this is by far the biggest lesson that I've learned in 2022, and perhaps I think this is maybe even the biggest lesson I think I've learned in my life this far, but it really is the concept of seasons and why focus and elimination are superpowers, right? So ladies and gentlemen, you can have it all, right? If you haven't heard it before, you can. You can have the absolute best social life. You can have the most incredible business. You can have all the wealth in the world. You can have everything, right? But the simple fact of the matter is you can't have it all at the same time. And the world is constantly trying to push this belief of balance, but the most successful people I've met in business, in social life, in anything, are the most unbalanced people I've also ever come across, because it's at the edge of maximization of certain areas of your life that you achieve everything that everyone else wants, right? And I don't think most people understand that intrinsically, right? So at this point, you're probably wondering, well, what is a season? And here's what I mean. If you think about your day, right, there is a real reason why you have 24 hours in a day. It takes about 24 hours for the earth to rotate around the sun, but there's really no reason why there is 7 days in a week, or why of those 7 days, 5 of them are work days and then 2 days are, Saturday and Sunday where you can just chill. That is more of a social construct than it is a real reason for it. And what happens is you start on Monday with no momentum because you've basically chilled the whole weekend. Then you spend the whole Monday to Friday building momentum, and then you kill all that momentum again over the weekend and then you start again. And I've just found that the people who do the most and get the most done, they go through intense periods where all they are focusing on is just one thing and they say no to everything else, and they absolutely maximize that area as much as they can. And then they'll go into a different season of life and then they'll focus on something else, right? And the easiest way to explain this is it is very, very, very difficult to simultaneously be trying to look for your dream girl and go on dates and take people out and meet new people and build relationships with people and be social, while at the same time simultaneously working the absolute max amount of hours you can, going to bed on time, tracking your sleep, eating, living like a monk, going to gym. Like, it's very, very difficult to do a lot of those things at the same time because they are in constant conflict with each other. And I think about 2022 and I often have a lot to think about here because for most of 2022, I suffered from this a lot. And this is something I really struggled with because I was in a relationship, and for a large part of it, I would go out with her or, I would go out with friends. And in the back of my mind, I would be thinking, I should be working. Like, I have a business to be building. I have people I'm responsible for. Like, I'm here, enjoying myself, spending money when I should be sitting, working and making money, right? But then when I'm sitting at my desk doing my work, then all I'm thinking is, I should be living like a 21-year-old, right? I'm living like a grandpa. I should be 21. I should be traveling, having fun, going out with my girlfriend. I should be building these memories and having these life experiences. And it's that whole thing of you want what you don't have and constantly just thinking about, where am I going next? And the grass is green. And I genuinely have been really guilty of this, and it's something that I've struggled with a lot in 2022 is always just thinking, what's next? What am I doing next? Where am I going next? How's this going to work out? Should I be doing this? Maybe I should be doing this better. And what happens when you live in that zone is you don't truly enjoy anything, and you also don't do anything to your full potential, because when you're with people, loved ones, girlfriends, boyfriends, family, you're not truly there. You are there and you're trying to be present, but your brain is very often thinking about other things. And because of that, you can't truly embrace it. And then when you're at your desk, you can't do your best work because it doesn't have your full attention. And you also feel guilty in both ways, right? It's just a constant internal struggle, conflict with you. And what you unfortunately realize is you have to pick one and absolutely just maximize it the best you possibly can. And then say, okay, I've changed seasons. Now it's time to focus on something else, right? And then maximize that and let something else come down. And the funny thing is when you go through this period of extreme maximization, you actually do a lot more, right? You build a way stronger business and you make way more money because you're doing it with full intention, but you also create way better memories and you build way stronger relationships because you're there present. And this is something that I wish I got taught way earlier, and it's major lesson that I plan on implementing in 2023, and I'll talk about it more in my goals. But this concept of deciding for a period of time, my only focus is this and everything else doesn't matter. And it's okay to say, 3 months after that, 4 months after that, now I'm in a different season and my priorities have changed. And just simply focusing on one thing at one time and then never feeling guilty about I should be doing this or I shouldn't be doing this because it's just not the season you're in. Okay, so in summary, what I'm really saying about this whole season thing is everything is just about riding momentum. It's about building as much momentum as possible in an area of your life and pulling that slingshot as much as you can before releasing, and then moving on to the next battle and picking and choosing your battles at a time and not trying to do or face all of them at the same time. And another really key part of this whole season thing that I realized is when you set an end date, when you consciously say, right, I'm in a work zone or monk mode. Monk mode is the term that's thrown around a lot online for this. Up until this date, because your brain has an end date, it has two things. One, it has something to look forward to, right? And that dopamine intrinsically gives you more motivation and more output, but also it forces you to take a lot of action because you have a limited amount of time, right? And most people go through life without that. They are trying to do everything at the same time, so they have no end dates, which means they have nothing to look forward to. But also because they feel like they have all the time in the world, they just don't take action, they just don't do anything, right? And that's where that common phrase comes from, where if you want something done, give it to the busiest person because they'll get it done, right? And that really links to both the lesson of seasons, but also the motivational vacuum, which is you have to pick things and have an end date, have that intrinsic motivation to push you, and then choose one thing at a time, and you'll end up making way more progress than everyone else around you. So the final thing that I wanted to say with this whole season thing is you have both micro and macro seasons. So micro seasons is kind of throughout the year, right? You have periods of work and then a bit more social, a bit more chill, kind of recharge the batteries and then go and work again, right? Those are micro seasons throughout the year, but you also have much more grander macro seasons, right? So for example, I know that 2023 is not going to be a year where I meet my dream girl. I just know that, right? It's not going to be a year where I spend a lot of time going on dates and meeting people and doing all these things. It's going to be a year of work. It's going to be a year of building the best version of me, growing my businesses, building a strong foundation. But 2-3 years from now, I'll have millions of dollars, hopefully. I'll be in the best mental and physical shape I've ever been in. And then it might be a time to sit back and say, right, I've done what I needed to do. Now it's time to, go on more social things, interact with more people, go on more dates, do all these things. And that's fine because then I'll be in a position where I can fully enjoy that. And so I'd encourage you after all of this to look at, first of all, your year and decide what those seasons are going to be. But then also look at your life as a whole and say, what seasons are you in? Especially because I know most of you watching this are probably between the ages of like 20 to 30. That should be a grand macro season of just building yourself and building foundations to set the rest of your life up. I think that's really important because most people just go through life just trying to do everything and they end up doing nothing as a result. All right, so I know that was a long one and I appreciate you guys sticking through all of this. So let me move to lesson number 6, which is the most important thing is environment, right? Now, environment also plays an incredible role in determining what season you're in, which I'll get to just now. But really, this whole lesson in turn came to me because at the end of the year, I moved to Dubai, right? Which is very different than the environment that I was in before. So a good friend of mine also pointed out recently that the people who make the most growth in their lives pay attention to how often they change their environment. And for me, this was a really strange realization because I sat and I thought about a lot of the people that I look up to and I kind of looked through some of their social media and stuff. And I realized it to be true that the people who at least I look up to and aspire for, they change environment at least every 3 months. And that really comes back to if you're changing your environment consistently, you're never getting comfortable. And as I said before, comfort and growth can't exist at the same time. And so the people who succeed the most or do the most things never let themselves become comfortable. So they consistently switch up their environment and constantly try and raise their standards. And when I say environment, I don't just mean the city that you're in or the house that you're in. I also mean the people that you surround yourself with, because that also forms part of your environment. So to really drill this point home, I made a tweet earlier this year around Cape Town versus Dubai, right? Just because that was a personal experience that I had and it made somewhat of a big difference in my life, right? And I genuinely believe that every city in the world whispers something to you. For example, if you want to be a model, right, and you're in the middle of some jungle in Africa, no one's going to find you. The same with being a rap artist, right? You have to go to the parts of the world where there are people looking for that. If you want to be a rapper or a musician, you have to go to Atlanta or LA, right? If you want to be a model, you need to go to New York City. All of these things make sense, right? If you want to do anything in the finance sector, you have to be in New York City where all the bankers and Wall Street are, right? If you're in the wrong place and no one's looking for you, even if you're the best in the world, you're not going to get found, right? And that also comes back to these cities. And I look at Cape Town versus Dubai and really just the difference in abundance thinking, because in Dubai, there's people with so much money and people just spend it ridiculously here. But I really bring this home back to me because I have someone in my family who pretty much every year they ask you what word you want to describe your year, right? And for me, my word for this year was hunger. And that's a really strange thing to say and doesn't really make sense. Why would you want to be hungry? But I meant hunger because I wanted the opposite of complacency and comfort, which is what I knew I had. Towards the whole of last year, I knew that I was very comfortable, right? There were some months last year where I genuinely didn't pay myself anything, right? Like I didn't move any money from the company to my personal bank account. I didn't pay myself a salary. I didn't do anything because I just didn't need to. Cape Town is so cheap comparative to the rest of the world, especially if you're earning dollars, that there were some months when I just didn't need to pay myself because I just didn't need the money, right? And that is very dangerous because you get incredibly comfortable and you start to question do I really need to work that hard today? Do I need to work this hard this month? For what? For more money when I'm not even paying myself any money? And yes, there's always people with more money in every city, I get it. But that is just a big thing that I started to feel last year. And I knew that that was holding me back, which is why I made the big leap to Dubai and why I chose the word hunger, because I knew if I just make myself hungry again, I'll get that motivation and I'll begin to strive forward again and again. So I'd encourage you to ask yourself, how comfortable are you? And again, like, I know I've made a lot of these lessons around comfort, but maybe that's just because that was a big theme for me in 2022. But I also just want to say that comfort is not the worst thing ever. Like, I do think comfort has a place in your life. Like, I don't regret any of 2022. I enjoyed the year a lot. And I also think comfortable is beautiful because it gives you a time to relax and rest. And I am incredibly grateful for being comfortable and having what I had. But I do think it's important that you at least just pay attention to how these seasons and environment and motivation, how all of these things are factoring into your comfort and what that means for your growth. And if you are happy where you are and you want to be comfortable, that's great. But I see a lot of people complaining that they are not where they want to be while simultaneously being comfortable. And that's a problem. Okay, so the 7th lesson that I learned this year is future planning and having a vision in general for your life and for your business is severely underestimated, because no one really talks about it and no one actually does it either. And if you look at some of the best products in the world, right? Tesla, iPhone, these companies who make these products are usually years and years ahead of time, right? The iPhone that's going to be released in 3 years from now is most likely in production or in development today. Right? That's how far these companies are planning ahead, because you don't build incredible products or businesses like this by waking up every day and simply saying, what am I gonna do today? I don't know. Maybe I'll do some of this. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know. But that's genuinely how I've found most people operate a lot of their businesses, especially with Systems and Profit, where I work with dozens of agencies every year to try and help them scale or grow. I generally speak to these people and I ask them, what are you gonna do today? Oh, I don't know. I'll do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And you end up just putting out fires all the time and you don't have a large direction for where your business is going. And the role of the CEO, I've also realized this year, it's not so much about doing the work. This is a big limiting belief that I had to let go of this year. But being in charge is not about doing the most amount of work, right? It's not about being the person in the business who's always doing the work, doing all these things. It's about having a clear picture for where you're going and steering the ship and guiding everyone to a common place that you want to achieve together as a collective group, right? And you see this a lot in people, but if you ask most people, if you ask a random person on the street, what do you want in your life for the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? Where are you going? What's the plan? Most people generally just have no idea, right? At all. And even in a more basic example, if you ask like random people, what do you want in your dream partner, right? Describe them. What characteristics do they exhibit? What do they have? What do they look like? What do they sound like? What do they believe? Most people just don't know, right? They don't take the time to actually consciously just sit and think about these things. And so most people tell you, I have no idea, or they'll just try and make it up on the spot, and it will be intrinsically obvious that they're making it up on the spot. But most people don't have a grand vision for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, never mind the next couple of years, and people operate their businesses the same way. Now, with that in mind, I really started to respect the people who have a very clear vision, but also they can say it with conviction. You can tell that they've thought a lot about it and they genuinely remind themselves of it a lot. And it's that whole thing of like having a vision board or just having a general plan. That was a major realization for me, because for the longest time, I thought like I was putting out fires in 2022. I was basically just jumping from fire to fire, problem to problem, doing this, doing that, solving things. And yes, I was making money, and yes, we were growing and we were doing things, but I didn't feel like we were moving towards a central point, right? I didn't feel like I had a clear vision for exactly what I wanted. And I just felt like I was just going, where I needed to go. And that was fine because I was paying the bills, growing, hitting all the metrics that I wanted. But at a certain point, you begin to realize if you just do that for long enough, you end up in a completely different destination or in a completely different direction than what you originally wanted, because you didn't have the time to sit down and say, why am I doing this? What direction am I going? How did I get here? Is this where I want to be? And then course correct, right? Because we live in a world of so much stimulation where everyone's just consuming stuff, doing things. No one takes the time to sit, think, meditate, and plan for what they're going for. And so I've spent a lot of time, early 2023 now with this lesson in mind, planning. And honestly, designing, I like that word designing. That's another thing that I learned, is everything is lifestyle design, right? Most people don't take the time to design their lives, which is why life ends up designing them for them, right? So genuinely take the time this year. I want you to sit down right now and take the time to design, what do I want in 2023, right? For all areas of life, health, wealth, love, happiness, doesn't matter. Pick an area and design it. Really consciously describe what you want, write it down and vividly remind yourself, because it will make all the difference. Okay, so I know that this has been a long one, and if you're still watching this, I appreciate it. I hope this has been insightful for you, but let's talk about the final lesson that I learned this year, which is you cannot separate any area of your life. And the way you do one thing, honestly, is the way you do everything. And I've also learned this now being surrounded by really, really successful people, but at the highest level, they care about everything, right? Like the way they look, dress, speak, their time management skills, their business, their health, everything is on point at all times, and every little detail matters. And that's been a really big realization for me. And again, I've learned this in the smallest areas, but I've always had really good attention to my business, and I've always been really almost ADHD or organized around how my business operates. But a big thing for me that I learned this year is fashion, right? I don't think I ever dressed like a tramp, right? But I never really put that much attention into fashion, or, the way I look. Like that just hasn't been an area of life I've focused on. But it really hit home for me this year when I realized that everyone generally focuses on everything, and you never know who you're going to meet. And 2 instances happened to me in 2022 where fashion, or the way you dress, made a big difference. And what I ultimately learned, and this is going off on a bit of a side tangent, but fashion is not about the way you look or the clothes you wear. It's about the confidence that you have. And so 2 situations happened to me this year, right? The first one is I was having a breakfast with a friend in Cape Town, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, are you Courtne? I've been watching your videos and you really motivated me and this and that. And, I've been able to do this and all of these things. Can I have a picture with you?" And this was a really interesting experience for me, because first of all, no one's ever approached me like that. Like that was just an interesting experience as a whole. But as I was taking the picture with him, I genuinely felt really bad, because I knew that I was letting him down, because I had just come from gym, I think. And I was wearing just very baggy clothes. I just wasn't looking on point. And I was taking this picture with this guy who had looked up to me and implemented a lot of the things that I've said, and I just wasn't looking on point. And whether he cared or not, I don't think he did, but I cared, right? And that made a big thing of, you have to obsess about everything in life, because you can't have one area of life being perfect and let the other fall down, because they all intermesh and interchange with each other. Another example also with clothing and with fashion is, I also recently went to a dinner, and there was one guy there who everyone wanted to talk to, right? He was a massive influencer. He had millions and millions of followers online, millions and millions of dollars, right? Everyone knew who he was. Everyone wanted to talk to him, and the whole room kind of orbited him in a way. And he came straight to me, and he started a conversation with me, which was really strange, right? Because there were other people there with way bigger socials, way bigger everything than me. But the reason he came to me is because he noticed the watch that I had on, right? And this is not even the absolute best watch you can have. There's way better watches, especially in that room. But the reason he came to me is because he wanted this one. And again, that was also just a little bit of luck and fortune, because it just so happened that the watch I had is the one that he wanted. But because I was wearing it, he came and had a conversation with me, and that conversation turned into a 20-minute conversation about a bunch of other things, and that led to an opportunity that I otherwise would never have had. And I would never have had that conversation. I can guarantee you that relationship would never have been built if I didn't have that watch on, right? If I didn't pay attention to the way I dressed or looked or the way I carried myself, that conversation would have never have happened, and that conversation led to a massive business deal. So it kind of shows you how one area, which is fashion and the way you dress, and business, which are very different areas of life, how interconnected they are, and how you can't separate these areas of life. And you have to become a person who cares about everything. The way you dress, look, do you show up on time? Are you honest, integral, right? The way you run your businesses, the way you do everything is the way you do one thing, right? And this was a big lesson for me, because it generally just forces you to look at your life as a whole, not just specific areas or zones, and say, am I the top 1% at everything? Because if not, that's not good enough. And that was a very strange lesson, I think, to learn. But if you put it all together, and I know that this video was a little bit all over the show, it's just my unfiltered thoughts. But ultimately, 2022 was a really, really good year. I'm incredibly grateful for the lessons that I've been taught, and I genuinely think that I'll be continuing to learn new lessons, and some of these lessons will probably even be retaught to me in the future. That's how life goes. But with that being said, hope this made sense. I hope all of it helped you in some way or some form. If you went through all of this, I appreciate you. I wish I had a video like this when I was just getting started out. And I would highly encourage you to take the time to sit and look at your 2022 and just think about all the experiences you had, all the lessons you had, and how can you do better. And with that being said, I wish you all the best for 2023.